Okay, so we're starting out in Blender. I'm using version 4.0, and I'm gonna exit out of our splash screen, and then I'm gonna hit A on my keyboard to select everything, and then X to delete it all. And next, I'm gonna hit 7 on my keyboard to come into top view. If that doesn't work for you, you wanna go to Edit, Preferences, and then under Input, make sure that Emulate Numpad is selected. Once we're in top view, we need to hit Shift A, and under Curve, let's bring in a Bezier curve. I'm gonna zoom in on my viewport a little bit, and then I'm gonna hit Tab on my keyboard so that we can open up edit mode. Once we're in edit mode, we're gonna see these handles here for our curve. And I'm gonna select the left handle here and hit R on my keyboard so that we can rotate this handle and make it a flat line, essentially. I'm gonna hit S on my keyboard so that we can scale down these handles. And I'm gonna do that over here on the right side as well. Now, I'm gonna hit A on my keyboard so that I can select both vertices. And then I'm gonna hit Shift D to duplicate them, and then hit G and Y on my keyboard to bring them down along the Y axis. And I'm gonna bring it down to about right here. Next, I'm gonna hit Shift D and hit G and Y to bring down another set here. And finally, I'm gonna hit Shift D and then G and Y to bring down one more line to about right here. Next, I'm gonna select the top 2 vertices on the right side and hit F on my keyboard to fill the line. And then next, I'm gonna select the middle 2 vertices on the left side and hit F on our keyboard to fill the line. And finally, I'm gonna select the bottom 2 vertices on the right side and hit F to fill that line in. Next, I'm gonna select all the vertices on the right side. And then once they're selected, I'm gonna select the right handles here. And then I'm gonna hit G and X on my keyboard to bring those out just a little bit more. Next, on this left side, I'm gonna select the middle 2 vertices. And once those are selected, I'm gonna then select the outermost handles on the left side. And then I'm gonna hit G and X on my keyboard to drag those out a little bit more on the X axis. I think here looks good. And next, I'm gonna select the bottom vertice on the left side and the top vertice on the left side and hit G and X on my keyboard to kind of pull those out so that they match the ending point of this curve. And so this is looking really great. Next, I wanna come into our curve data and I wanna open up geometry. From here, I wanna open up our bevel properties, and under depth, let's start out with 0.07. Let's also make sure that under resolution, we change this setting to, let's say, about 15. And next, these 2 settings here, I want them to both be about, let's say, 25. Next, I'm gonna come back into my bevel depth, and let's set this to about 0.09. I want it to be just a little bit thicker. And next, let's hit Shift A on our keyboard and bring in a plane. I'm gonna hit S on my keyboard to scale this up. And then I'm gonna kind of rotate our viewport a little bit so that we can kind of see this in 3/4 view. And we'll notice that the plane is kind of clipping our pipe here. So with our plane selected, let's hit G and Z on our keyboard so that we can grab it and bring it down in the Z axis. And let's just bring it down to where it's not clipping anymore. I think here looks good. And so with this plane selected, I wanna go ahead and just get a quick texture on it. So I'm gonna come here and make sure that we're under our shader editor. And from here, I'm gonna create a new shader. I'm gonna come up here to our viewport and hit Z and 2 so that we can see our material viewport. And so first, I'm gonna hit Shift A and bring in a color ramp and plug that color ramp into the base color. And on this color ramp, I'm gonna make this white value kind of a darker gray. And then this value that's all black, I'm gonna bring that down to just kind of a darker gray. And next, I'm gonna hit Shift A and bring in a bump node. And I'm gonna plug that bump node into the normal. Next, I'll hit Shift A and bring in a noise texture. And then I'll also hit Shift A and bring in a color ramp. I'm gonna plug in the color of our noise texture into the factor of our color ramp, and then the color of our color ramp into the height of our bump node. Next, I'll bring these 2 values in on our color ramp, and then I'll scale up our noise texture. From here, I'm gonna bring in the strength down on our bump node, and I'm gonna also invert the bump node as well. And if I zoom in here, you'll notice now we're getting this kind of nice, almost ground effect occurring. And so I kind of want to bring the scale of it up a little bit more, maybe up the lacunarity of it. And I think this is looking like a pretty decent ground texture. maybe I come in here to the strength and lower it a little bit more to make this even just a little bit more subtle. And then I come here to our color ramp value and I kind of bring these values just a little bit closer here. And I just kind of adjust these settings until I'm happy. And so I think for now that's gonna look just great. And next, let's come back up here to our pipe and let's add a modifier to it. I'm gonna come over here to modifiers and I'm gonna hit add modifier and I'm gonna hit generate and I'm gonna add a solidify modifier. And in order to see this better, I'm gonna come into my viewport and I'm gonna hit Z and 6. And then over here in our solidify modifier under thickness, you'll notice that as I adjust this setting, the thickness of our pipe increases. And so that's pretty nice. I think I want our pipe to be about right here. I think that looks great. Okay, great. So now if I hit Z2 and go back into material preview mode, we can begin to start working on the texture for our pipe. So first I wanna make sure that our pipe is selected and come in here to our shader editor and hit new to create a new shader. This first principled BSDF, I wanna select it and under base color, I wanna make this kind of a darker, kind of a blackish color, but not all the way black. And I also wanna make sure the roughness is up here to about 0.8. So for this black texture that our animation kind of resolves in, I want it to kind of have kind of like a ashy looking kind of, I don't know, just I want it to have sort of a texture to it and make it look kind of like it's burnt almost. And so in order to do this, I'm gonna come down in here to our shader editor and I'm gonna hit Shift A and I'm gonna bring in a noise texture. I'm also gonna hit Shift A and I'm gonna bring in a color ramp and then I'm gonna also bring in a bump node by hitting Shift A and typing in bump. I'm gonna go ahead and connect these 3 nodes just like this, making sure that our color ramp output is being connected into the height input of our bump node and then that our bump node is being plugged in to the normal of our principled BSDF. And from here, I'm gonna adjust our color ramp and then I'm gonna bring the scale up of our noise texture. I think I'll adjust the lacunarity a hair and bring up the distortion maybe just a little bit as well. And so I'm also gonna make sure that we invert this on our bump node. And I think that this looks great, but it's a little bit strong. So I'm gonna come here to our strength and I'm gonna lower our strength just a bit. I think this looks pretty cool. And so now we have one of our textures figured out. And the next texture is gonna be really easy. It's just pretty much a glass texture. So I'm gonna come in here and make sure that we have our pipe selected. And I'm gonna go ahead and just disconnect our black texture for now. And I'm gonna hit Shift A and I'm gonna type in glass. And I'm gonna bring in a glass BSDF node. And I'm gonna plug this into the surface so that we can kind of get an idea of what our glass texture is gonna look like. And of course, we're in Eevee right now, so it's not gonna look very correct. But I know from experience that I'm gonna keep this IOR the same, but I'm gonna up the roughness to about 0.2. And next, essentially we need to mix these 2 shaders. And in order to do that, I'm gonna make sure that our black texture is selected and I'm gonna hit Shift A on my keyboard and I'm gonna bring in a mix shader. I'm gonna plug our black texture in to this first shader input and I'm gonna plug in our glass texture to the bottom shader input. And you'll notice now, if I switch this factor setting, I'm gonna be transitioning from our glass texture to our black texture. I'm gonna keep this at 0.5 for now. And so what we need to do now is tell Blender how to mix these 2 materials together. And in order to do that, we're gonna use this factor. So first I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm gonna bring in a color ramp and I'm gonna hit flip color ramp. And that's gonna switch these values from black and white to white and black. And next I'm gonna take this black value and I'm gonna bring it over here to the left. About right here, looks good. Next I'll take the color output and plug it into the factor input of our mix shader. Next I'm gonna hit Shift A and bring in a gradient texture. I'm gonna plug the color of this gradient texture into the factor of our color ramp. And then I'm also gonna hit Shift A and bring in a mapping node. I'm gonna plug that mapping node into the gradient texture. I'm then gonna hit Shift A and bring in a mix node. I'm gonna set this mix node to color. And here under mix, I'm gonna set this to linear light. I'll plug the result into the vector of our mapping node. And then I'm gonna plug in a couple nodes to our linear light mix node here. The first is a noise texture. First, I'll hit Shift A and bring in a noise texture. I'm gonna set this noise texture from 3D to 4D, and then I'm gonna plug that color output into the A input of our mix node. Next, I'm gonna hit Shift A and bring in a texture coordinate node. I'll take the object output and plug it into the vector of our noise texture here. Next, I'm going to hit Shift A and bring in a mapping node, and then I'll select our texture coordinate node and hit Shift D to duplicate it. On this bottom texture coordinate node, I'm gonna plug the UV output into the vector input of this new mapping node. I'm gonna come down here to the scale of this mapping node, and under the X value, I'm gonna change this from 1 to 3.7. Next, I'll plug the vector output into the B input of our mix shader. From here, I'm gonna come up here to this noise texture, and I'm gonna adjust a few settings. The scale, I'm gonna change from 5 to 16. The detail, I'm gonna change from 2 to 14. I'll leave the roughness at 0.5, and I'll change the lacunarity setting down to 1.6. From here, you're gonna notice that as I change this X location property, we start to reveal our glass texture. And so this is basically the effect that we want. We just got a few more settings to go until we have a really nice render. And so for this noise texture, kind of where it's mixing here between our glass and our black texture, I want to come back here, and in this W input, I'm going to input a value node. So I'm going to search value, and I'm going to plug this value node into the W of our noise texture. And you'll notice that as I increase this value, our noise texture kind of animates. And that's really nice. And so next, with this value selected, I'm gonna type in hashtag frame. And this is gonna be basically inputting an expression that's gonna basically animate this according to which frame we're on. And so this looks really nice. You'll notice how as I hit spacebar to play our animation, you'll see that it starts to animate, but it's kind of animating too fast. So I'm gonna come back into this expression where it says frame, and I'm gonna divide this by, let's say, 200. And now it's just kind of animating slower. And I think this is gonna look great in addition to once we animate the X factor here. Next, I wanna make sure that we get that emissive effect, that kind of glowing material occurring between our black texture and our glass texture. And in order to do that, it's actually pretty easy. All I'm gonna do is down here under emission on our principled BSDF node, I'm gonna toggle that down, and then I'm gonna hit Shift A and search for a color ramp node. I'm gonna zoom into this color ramp node. First things first, I'm gonna flip the color ramp node, and then I'm gonna bring this black value all the way over to about right here. Next, I'm gonna hit this plus sign to add in a couple more stops. This first stop, I wanna set this to kind of a bluish color. In the next stop, I wanna set this to orange. Next, I'm gonna take this gradient texture up here that we plugged into our color ramp that ultimately is plugged into the factor part of our mix shader. I'm gonna take that color ramp output, and I'm gonna plug that down here into the factor of this color ramp that we just created. And then I'll take the color output of the color ramp, and I'll plug that into here under the color of our emissive. Next, under strength here in our principled BSDF, I'm gonna take this from 0 to 60. And now, once I begin to crunch these values here in this color ramp, we're gonna start to get a really nice fall off effect occurring. And if I hit space bar to play our animation, you'll see that our effect is starting to come to life. Next, I'm gonna come up here to my viewport. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger, and we're gonna kind of get our scene dialed in. In order to do that, I'm gonna hit Shift A on my keyboard, and I'm gonna grab a light, and I'm gonna import a sun. From here, I'm gonna go to our light properties and our strength. I'm gonna set this to 5. Back in my viewport, I'm gonna hit Z and 8 on my keyboard to bring up our render preview mode. And then under our render settings, I'm gonna make sure that we're in cycles, that we're using the GPU, and that experimental is set as well. I'm gonna come here and make sure that I'm using my denoiser in my viewport. Next, with our sun selected, I'm gonna come down here into our light data. I'm gonna change the angle from 0.526. I'm gonna increase that value so that we get kind of softer shadows. And then with our sun selected, I'm gonna hit R on our keyboard so that we can adjust the angle of it and get kind of just a different look kind of going here in our render. So that's good. All right, so really quickly here, just with the sun, we've kind of added a little bit of light to our scene here. And I think the next thing we have to do is hit Shift A, and let's bring in a camera. And with our camera selected here, I'm gonna hit Control Alt and then 0 on my keyboard, and that's gonna kind of bring our camera view to our current view essentially. And then by hitting N on my keyboard, I can bring up this panel here on the right and make sure view is selected. And with view selected, I can come here to camera to view. And now I can kind of pan around here, and this is controlling my camera. I'm gonna come down here with our camera selected under viewport display. And where it says passer part out, I'm gonna change this from 0.5 all the way up to 1. And this is just gonna give us a better idea like what we're seeing through our camera. And so I'm gonna mess around here just a little bit just to kind of get the right angle for our shot, like kind of how I want this to look and feel, or yeah, kind of how you would like it to look and feel. I think kind of a top-down view like this is gonna look really cool. And so yeah, I'm happy with my camera view here. I'm gonna uncheck this so I'm no longer adjusting it. And the next thing we need to do is we need to animate this material shift across our pipe. And that's gonna be really easy. Back in our shader editor, all we really need to do is animate this X value. And we need to animate it starting when it's all the way off of the pipe. Back here, in my case, it's at negative 3.88. So I'm gonna right click on my mouse here, and I'm gonna insert a single keyframe at negative 3.88, because that is where the texture kind of falls off of my pipe. And I'll bring up another little window here so that we can open up our timeline. And with this mapping node selected, we can see our keyframe here. And so this is where I want our texture mapped at the beginning of our animation. So I'm gonna grab this keyframe and I'm gonna push it back to 0. And next, I'm gonna set another keyframe for this X position when it fully transitions across our pipe completely, 0.42 in this case. So I'll right click and I'll insert a single keyframe. In this case, this keyframe is inserted here at 91. And I can drag this out to be however long I want my animation to be. So if I want this effect to take place across my pipe between 1 frame and 170 frames, I can just adjust it like this. And so this is looking really great. Lastly, let's open up our compositor so that we can get our glare and our glow emissive material looking really nice. So with our compositor open, let's hit use nodes, and then let's kind of create a little bit of space between these two nodes, and we're gonna just import one node. We're gonna hit Shift A and search for a glare node. And I'm gonna put that glare node here right in between them. And I'm gonna change this streaks setting to fog glow. And I'll change the medium setting to high. And from here, I'll go back into our layout, and I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna toggle down this setting right here. And under here, compositor, you're gonna see some settings that you can change, camera or always. I'm gonna set this to always. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna allow us to see that glow effect in our viewport. And currently in Blender, in the viewport, that effect is a little bit strong. So if you hit F12 to render it out, you're gonna notice more, kind of a more accurate depiction of that glow once your render fully completes. So from here, I'm just gonna come over here to our output settings. I'm gonna save my file where I want it, and I'm gonna change the file format to FFmpeg video. And this is gonna render your animation out as a video. Finally, I'll make sure that my timeline is set correctly. So our animation ends here at about 170 frames, and I'll just let it kind of play out just a few more here at about 187. So that's kind of where I'll set my animation timeline to end, here at 187. And from here, I'm just gonna hit render and hit render animation.